Hey everybody, Tug here, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different, a little bit out of the ordinary, and we're going to talk some D&D. Generally, I just do video game stuff over at my channel, twitch.tv/tugboet, but I thought I would take the opportunity to share one of my other passions, which is tabletop RPGs. I really love DMing in particular, but I love playing D&D, and I love playing tabletop RPGs, so I figured if you guys enjoy my video game content, and that's one of my passions, maybe you would enjoy some of this. So I have talked about a little bit on stream some of my tips and tricks for making a quick and dirty campaign setting and quick and dirty world building, where to start, some pitfalls that DMs fall into, some of the traps that we all kind of get stuck in when we're trying to build worlds for the first time. So I'm going to go through some of that, and we're going to do a very quick, very high level quick campaign setting and see if we can't make something fun. And if it works out, maybe we'll do a couple more videos where we refine this high level one into something a little more workable, and maybe I'll be able to upload some videos or do some live streams where I run a session or two from the setting. So I think that's what we're going to do on this video. Sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's go. So let's dive into where all great ideas, great campaigns, great businesses, great everything begins. A Google Doc. So let's make a quick campaign setting, alright? So the best way to start, and one of the biggest pitfalls that everyone falls into, as I mentioned, is that their scope is wrong. You don't have to make a full world. All we need are some high-level threads. Picture it as a yarn ball, but only the outside threads are visible. So it's just a loose connection of strings that are going around and around. And as your players explore, you slowly knit and loom that together to create a tapestry that they can play on. But you don't need to completely cover the entire ball. You just need to do the areas where they're around. And if you find out they're interested in a different area, then you go and you hash that out. But you have some threads to pull down to tease them with. So what we're going to do is just establish some very high level stuff here right now. So the first thing to do, the most important piece to hash out, is where you're starting. Where are you going to start this? What are you going to do? It has to be either a transition area or somewhere where they're going to spend a little bit of time and do a little leveling up before they break out, because oftentimes it's a dangerous world out there. A lot of tabletop RPGs, D&D in particular, focus on that points of light. The world is a black, bleak, and dangerous place, and civilization, these little villages, are points of light on the map, and everything in between, there be dragons. So let's kind of take that idea and let's make a starting area, but let's make it something where they're going to spend a little bit of time. Let's have somewhere where there's like a little bit of intrigue. So let's do starting village, right? So starting village, and underneath that, where you want to have some intrigue. Don't know what it is yet, but let's have some form of intrigue for the players to kind of stumble into. I have a pretty good opening quest line that I typically start my campaigns with, at least some of them. If I have repeat players, it's difficult to pull the same trick twice, and I'm not going to go over it right now, but we may go over it at some time because I don't want to give it away. But we'll have some intrigue in the village. The other thing that's a really popular thing to do, something that's easy to build upon, is precursors. So think Mass Effect. Think almost every sci-fi story and game that's out there, there are precursor civilizations. Something great and grand that came before, but somehow, someway disappeared. So let's do precursors. We don't know what that is yet, but we'll figure it out. So we have some form of precursor civilization. So what that means, maybe this starting village is built on the ruins of a precursor civilization. That could work. So, okay, intrigue, right? Looping back to intrigue, we have a precursor civilization and we want to do some intrigue. So let's say maybe the ruins of the precursor civilization are not well known. They've only recently been discovered. So recently discovered ruins, perhaps maybe in the sewers or underneath a sawmill or some building, something that was controlled and then taken over by whomever the initial conflict is going to take place within the village. Let's say it's a businessman, someone who's a little bit higher up and has his fingers in a lot of different pies, and maybe one of his people found the ruins and reported it back to him, and they started pulling treasures out of there, valuables, things that they could sell, but often there's a controlled market for the stuff from this, and should it get out that someone had found ruins, well, the village would be flooded with treasure hunters and adventurers looking to cash in on it, so it has to stay hush-hush. There's our intrigue. We have to keep it hush-hush. We don't want people from the big cities. We don't want those big adventurers. We don't want those big treasure hunters rolling in and stripping everything out from under us. So we got to keep this quiet. There's our intrigue. We found ruins of a precursor civilization, say elves or dwarves or something fantasy themed, and we want to cash in on it. This guy, this initial protagonist, this initial antagonist rather, wants to keep it for himself, wants to cash in on all of it. So that's what he's working for behind the scenes. But in front of the scenes, he needs something to cover for the transportation and the movement of all these different goods, and he needs to hide the precursor civilization that's been discovered, the ruins that have been discovered underneath. So, okay, so we have our intrigue is the ruins of the precursor civilization, trying to cash in what has been found, and wants to keep it a secret from outsiders. We don't want anybody coming in taking our stuff. Wants to keep it a secret from outsiders, looking to possibly hire some nefarious types to ensure secrecy. So that is our initial intrigue. So that's our initial starting village. The village can have, let's say there's different scales. So one of the easiest things to do when you're establishing a village or a town or a city, think about how many inns you want to have in that. So something small would be a one-inn town. That's just where all the farmers go to have a drink after a long day in the fields. Then you have kind of the next step up is a two-inn town. You have a nice one because there's some folks from out of town that come in to visit and they want a nicer place to stay and eat and drink and be entertained. And it's a good place for merchants and people who are slightly more well-to-do to meet with them when they're coming out of town. And then you have the other inn for the farmers and the common folk who kind of, sit by the hearth. There's straw and sawdust on the floor to soak up the undesirable liquids and all of that. The standard fare inn. Let's say that this is a two-inn town. The big inn is run by the main merchant and antagonist. That's his hook, that's his presence. Let's say he runs the inn, and he also has his finger in a couple of different other businesses. So we have that, and then that hooks into a plot hook, an opening quest that I often run. So that's going to be the initial part. So it's a two-inn town. So that means we need to name our two inns. Best way to do that, there are a ton of random in-name generators, D&D generators, name generators, whatever it is. One of the best ways to do random name generation is just noun, adjective, pick a theme and pick a descriptor and then pick a noun and put it in there. Animal, some type of animal, the frenzied badger. There we go. There's our low rent inn. Low rent inn. Frenzied badger. High rent. Something a little more respectable. It's not going to be necessarily a woodland creature, maybe something mythical. Not really a unicorn, a Pegasus. A Pegasus, something regal. So a Pegasus, and then maybe a color. We could do... you don't want to do a color like red. You want to do something like crimson or violet or lavender. Something that fits the pale, little dark to go with a Pegasus. How about crimson has a good ring to it, but it is a little sinister. That could work. That could be a little bit of a heavy-handed hint to the players that it might be a focus of the underworld in this city, the Crimson Pegasus. Let's go with it, though, because often players will overlook things like that, and generally they have to be beaten about the head with hints about certain things, but we'll see. So we have the Frenzied Badger is the low rent, the high rent is the Crimson Pegasus. There we go. That's high-level stuff of our starting area. Crimson Pegasus, which is run by our main merchant and antagonist. Let's put that under there. And we should probably name our antagonist. Let's have it be a female antagonist. Let's have her be... She inherited from her father. Always jaded because her father wanted a son to inherit his businesses, but all he had was a daughter. She is pretty ruthless, pretty sharp, very shrewd, and very powerful. We will need a name for her. I think she should be kind of overly feminine, very soft, very subtle, very insidious with her machinations. So she needs definitely a lighter name. So Crimson Pegasus, let's call her Rose. And let's make Rose the last name. So that can be an easy link to the Crimson. So let's call her something innocuous. Annabelle Rose runs the inn. There we have... that's pretty much all we need at this point for our starting village. So we have... There's intrigue. Because of a precursor civilization in recently discovered ruins, they're trying to cash in on what's been found and keep it secret from outsiders, looking to possibly hire some nefarious types to ensure secrecy. These could become the players depending on how they handle things. If they go a certain way on the morality scale, maybe she ends up hiring them to further her own gains, and maybe she becomes a long-term ally if they take the campaign in that direction. The low rent inn in the town is the Frenzied Badger. We have a high rent of the Crimson Pegasus. It's the big inn run by the main merchant and antagonist in the town, who is Annabelle Rose. Heiress. Let's put that in here so we don't forget. Not that I ever forget anything, ever. Heiress left companies by father who only ever wanted a son. And that should help to flesh out her character once we come back to do that. So we have the starting village. We have precursor ruins underneath, let's say, recently discovered ruins. Let's go with... In an old tapped out mine, under the control of Annabelle Rose and co. Perhaps she was trying to reinitiate the mine after a long time it had run dry, and they discovered the ruins breaking through a wall or something. That's a little more believable than like a plow hitting a buried stone door, or it could, or we could also do, let's put this in here in case we decide to change, perhaps a basement expansion for the inn. Could also be an option. Maybe expanding or adding a wine cellar, something for higher end clients, trying to connect with merchants in bigger cities. Tried to put in a wine cellar and expand the basement and stumbled into these ruins. So there's our 2 options for that, and we can come back to that just as quick notes on the town. So now we just need some quick stuff for the area around it. So this is definitely going to be points of light, which is just each little town and city is a bright point of light, a bright point of safety, and then the surrounding areas are darkness, are danger, are threats. You don't spend the night out in the wilds unless you're well prepared and you fortify yourself for that situation. So, I want to write down points of light so we remember that, so that we remember that when you're not within the confines, when you're not within the walls of a city, you are in danger. You are in mortal danger at every point. So the surrounding area, so if we're on mines, let's say this is rocky terrain. Let's say it is on a hill. Maybe a small mountain, or in the foothills of a small mountain, just off the coast. Rocky terrain in foothills of a small mountain range near the coast. There's a on the coast nearby. There is a small fishing village that regularly floods. So most of the folks have moved back into the foothills away from the shore. There's still a small fishing village down there. Mostly it's just the shipping folks and the fishermen that stay down there. And everybody else kind of moved up into the foothills to get away from the constant flooding, get onto drier ground, and kind of create a crossroads and a point for the goods from the sea to be traded further inland. So that is the basis of the surrounding area. So then we have options for, we can take the players into the mountains. So then we have mountains terrain, we have coastal terrain, and we also have open fields between the town and the coast, and then we'll say there is some dense forest to either side of the mountain range. To either side of mountains. And that gives us a lot of options. So we can do deep into the Lost Forest, we can do up into the mountains, we can do caves in the mountains, or trying to clear passes across the mountains. And then we have stuff that can go down onto the coastal areas, possibility of going out on ships. This kind of area as a starting point. When you're starting players in a world, you want to make sure that you give them options. I try to give them 4 different options, kind of points on a compass. You can go north, and that's going to be kind of one type of terrain. You can go south, and that's another type of terrain. And it doesn't have to be direct. You could be deep in the woods, but if you go far enough south, you hit the coast. You go far enough north, you hit the mountains. You go far enough, you want to give them options of different ways to go. Maybe the more metropolitan area is through a very difficult area or across an ancient bridge, things like that. You want to give them options so that they don't feel like, okay, I'm in this starting area, and then the only way to get out of this starting area is going through this dangerous mountain pass, and that takes me to the next town. That's kind of theme park MMO style, right? Where you go from quest hub to quest hub to quest hub. The idea is to have an open and expansive world where they can do whatever they want. So by having different terrain kind of surrounding this little starting village, it gives them options. We have the mountains, we have the coast, we have the dense forest and the open fields. So we have options of what they can do, different directions that they can take once they feel like they have outgrown this town, or once one of the quest threads takes them away. So we need to, now that we have the base kind of surroundings, let's just put in here, fishing village is occupied only by shipping and fishermen. So then what we need is the nearest big city. That's going to be the next point, kind of the capital area. That's always a progression point when you're going into a campaign, where you go from the woodlands, from the outside, and you kind of work your way closer to civilization as the players become more entwined into the world, into intrigue, into politics, into how the world around them operates. They always tend to end up drifting towards a big city. So we want to give them that option. So it's a place where this town would be shipping its goods. So we have some open fields, we have some farmers' fields, we have goods from the coast, fish, and we could say there's docks, and they're getting trade from some folks on islands off the coast, things like that. Those goods need to be taken, and they need to be sold at a bigger market. So those things can go to the nearest big city. So that's where we kind of need to start to kind of branch out and not drill down as many points as we have for our starting village. So our starting village, we kind of hammered out a few smaller points, some things to help us lay out the beginning of the campaign. And as we get further and further away, we're going to go into less and less detail. So let's name the big city that is nearby. Let's say that it is through the dark woods, that there is a fairly well-traveled and established, though dangerous, road that travels to the main town. One of the other business prospects of Annabelle Rose could be that she runs the safest caravans for goods between cities. She kind of uses the inn as a gathering point for all the merchants that want to come and want to ship into the city. So she has kind of propped herself up as the main person to run caravans to the city. Just one of the many little tendrils of her web that she has cast across this initial village. So if we're going through the woods, it's kind of a mountainous area near the coast. We want to give the city kind of a... This is going to be kind of a midway city, something that is like intersecting, something that has come up at a crossroads. So maybe that town is at a point where there's connections from this village, from another village, maybe a dwarven community in the mountains sends their goods down to ship to market here. A crossroads, a mingling of all different peoples that kind of come together at this point and then send their goods off into the world from there. So it's been established from a crossroads. It becomes kind of... So this area would be like it would be the key. Okay, so it would be the key to merchant trade in the area. So let's have key in the name. We can always kind of just make up our own world, our own words for it. We can have key and then slap some extra letters on there. Something that I like to do is sometimes I will give an area or a town an abstracted name. So you give it a name that perhaps, let's say, maybe it came down from Dwarvish or something, which is why it's kind of nonsensical. So let's call it Viaki? No, that sounds too medicinal. Let's call it... Let's go with Kragan Key. That has a rumbly kind of dwarvish feel to it. It references rock, and it has key in the name. So Kragan Key is the name, and perhaps this city has a large dwarven and gnomish presence. Because of the mountains, it could be a very big amalgamation of a bunch of different cultures, but the primary and overarching culture that has overtaken the town over time is dwarvish and rock gnomes that have come down from the hills and established themselves in the town. So this little city is called Kragan Key, often called by travelers as the Key. That's something that I like to do. So you take a more abstracted name like Kragan Key and you give it a nickname, something that is more direct. It's often, if you think about the simple folks in simple villages that exist in like this type of setting, this Middle Ages setting, education is not a huge thing for most folks. So they often come up with nicknames. They call the big open area the fields or the flats or the salt, or they simplify things and they have nicknames for things. So that's something that I like to bring into, and it just adds just a little flavor and a little bit of depth to the world when you're describing it to your players. Like, you're going to head to Kragan Key and, oh, you're heading to the Key. Can you do this for me? You know, it makes the world seem a little more intimate to me, I guess. And you don't want to do that with every location, but key points like Kragan Key will become kind of a waypoint on their journey and on everything's journey from this area. It's good to do things like that, just to add a little bit of flavor to it. So we have Kragan Key. It has a large dwarven and gnomish presence, and it's often called by travelers the Key. The primary crossroads and market for goods from the surrounding area. That's pretty much all we need for Kragan Key right now. This is top level stuff. So that is basically the bulk of the starting area. So now we have the starting village, we have a little bit of the terrain around there, and we have the next kind of slightly smaller small city or very large town that would be nearby, that would become a point of interest to the players down the line. We can also have, you know, islands off the coast if they decide to go off the coast. So let's add that very quickly. Let's add coastal islands. These, we'll say these are mostly untamed, and goods that come from here are primarily live goods. So creatures, meats, hunting, furs, leathers, wood, live goods, and lumber. So they're basically not really established islands, kind of wild islands off the coast that may have perhaps some mystery surrounding them. It's always fun to have something like a little... It's very easy to establish an area that is entirely mundane, and for the most part, the area that we've established is entirely mundane. So let's say that there's some mystery surrounding these islands. There's some mystery surrounding, every now and then a fog rolls across the islands, and it causes weird stuff to happen. Surrounding occasional fog. And oddities. So that kind of that's something that you can like hint drop. If they go and talk to the fishermen, they'll say, you know, oh, avoid the islands if the fog rolls in. You don't want to be there when the fog rolls in. And that's just a little hook and a little world building. And we can come back and hash that out later, but that's just a quick look. So then we have our starting village, we have some intrigue, we have some stuff that could happen there, we have the surrounding area, we have 2 now big points that could cause the players to be pulled in those directions, and I think that's an excellent starting point. So that was not all that long. I mean, we're talking, that was 20-ish minutes that took to kind of just quickly hash that out, and those are just the basic threads, the barest threads of the very beginnings of a world. And when we come back and when we really start to fill this out, we don't have to go particularly that much further than what we've done already. We'll want to establish some other big points, capital cities, if what kind of governmental structure is over this area. Is there a king? Is it a council? Is it the Wild West? Is it, you know, we need to establish that, but the overarching geography and the basis for what we're going to do, we've pretty much established. So I think that's a good spot to stop for this one. And then on the next one, what we'll do is we'll establish those governmental boundaries, and we'll establish some of the capital cities and perhaps a couple threads that interconnect those cities together, and we can try and figure out how they're playing against each other just a little bit. Again, it's not something that we have to go into detail about, but just little things that can be mentioned, like, yeah, there's tension between these 2 countries, between these 2 capitals, between these 2 rulers, that kind of thing. But we don't need to go into like, oh, here's the recent scuttlebutt about it. We don't need all of that right now. What we need is just the barest, faintest imagery about it to tease out, because really they don't need to know about that until they become directly involved in it. But as long as you have those little threads that you can tease out, then maybe they will become interested in it, and then we'll build it out. So that's where we'll wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed this real quick campaign setting, or real quick campaign start, I guess. It's not a full campaign setting yet, but we'll keep picking at it. And if you'd like to see more of this type of content, please hit the subscribe button, please hit the like button. It's what you do on this platform, and it really does help. So I would honestly, genuinely appreciate it. If you want to see some of my other video game content, there are videos on this channel that you can check out. You can check out a tour of all the stuff that I got behind me as well. I'll put a link to that somewhere up here. And you can always catch me live at 10 a.m. Eastern Time at twitch.tv/tugboat, where I play games, talk nonsense, and often, very, very often, go on hour-long rants about Dungeons and Dragons. So that's all I got for today. As always, as ever, remember, be good to each other. Bye, everybody.